Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, he does the damn thing. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Oh, I'm just making sure that the sluices are installed properly, and gotta make sure that there's proper kerning on these ventricles.
I'm sorry, you've lost me.
It's very technical.
You've had me at sluices, and I think you're just making up words after that.
You will never know.
You are an engineer, though, so I just assume you know what you're talking about.
It's funny, dams are one thing that I don't remember ever learning about, but as you say, I am an engineer.
Just make the water stop. Easy.
Yeah, just put stuff in the way till it stops, right?
If an 11-year-old kid can do it, I feel like you can handle it.
Exactly.
This week, our 19-part coverage of Stephen King's It continues with part 4, covering chapters 6 and 7 of the novel. 2 more chapters and 2 more characters as we hang out with both Eddie and Mike in the summer of 1958. First, a sad story of another Pennywise victim, then a giant bird attack, and a damn leper. I spell that D-I-M. That's one of those jokes that doesn't work in audio format.
Yeah, we do a lot of those. So many delightful jokes that are just
that no one will ever understand. They just won't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
As you said, some heavy stuff this week. Some scary stuff this week. Relatively, I guess there was a little bit of kind of the delightful Stephen King writing kids bantering and hanging out and shooting the shit with each other and being delightful, which is always fun, but relatively little amount of that. Overall, I mean, it's amazing writing. It's some of the most straightforward kind of horror that I remember us ever covering, where it's just like there is a monster chasing a kid.
Yeah,
pretty,
rinse and repeat 3 times.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of want to talk about that actually, like how it seems like King wrote this book with the prompt of like, what is a good framework for a novel where I will have the excuse to have monsters hunting kids over and over and over. Different monsters, right?
Yeah.
So that's lots of good stuff. We're gonna I'm almost sure this is gonna be like a long episode just because there's so many like different set pieces and different interestingly specific things to go into this week.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's gonna be a long episode because it's us, but also those things. Yes. No, I agree with you. I for some reason the Eddie stuff, and when I Eddie I mean the tale of the missing Eddie, not the Eddie that we're going to be in the chapter of here in a bit. That stuff like always kind of fades from my memory until I specifically remember it, and then it's like just bam back there. I think there's a lot of interesting thing King is doing in comparison between characters this week, within chapter 6 itself, and then also comparing between chapters as well. It's not an accident that this character is named Eddie, I think. And I think that's very intentional. Also, his father is named Richard, which is another Richie. And I know, a lot of people have the same names, but also in a book, those things feel intentional.
Sure, I totally agree. There's plenty of names to choose from whenever you reuse names. I don't know. I think some people do it for like realism's sake, but I think that here, as you're saying, we're doing it for the sake of drawing a contrast where it's like, I mean, I think a lot of what we're doing by having this Eddie character be here at all is just to say, hey, this is not one of those stories where everybody's going to get out of this scot-free and they defeat the evil and it's just no sweat. It's gonna be rough. There's gonna be a lot of cost paid, and I think to get us used to the idea that characters that we care about could die, we kind of know which ones aren't going to die because we've seen the future, but we don't necessarily know. We don't know everything.
Yeah,
obviously.
No, you're definitely right. Let's get into it, shall we?
Yep.
We begin with chapter 6, titled "One of the Missing: A Tale from the Summer of 58." And I think this is a really interesting choice. This is one of those things that you could almost say feels like an interlude chapter, but it's not. It's just a chapter, and it's one of those things that I think kind of tricks you here, because you open the page, you get to this chapter, and you're like, oh, we're kind of throwing away the normal formatting structure we had established here. The last two chapters, we've started back in 85 with one of our central characters, and then we've gone back in time to them as kids. Now we're doing something different. We open this chapter with another epistolary style relaying of the events of the missing and dead, as we'll find out later, Eddie Corcoran. How does the audiobook say this kid's name? Do you know?
I think Corcoran, like exactly what you just said.
Okay. It's one of those rare moments where I was like, I think I said that right, but I have no idea. And then so we do this, we have this kind of epistolary style, and then we have a narrative style of revealing what actually happens, and then suddenly we find ourselves surprised, this is actually a Mike Hanlon chapter. And I actually think this is really super clever, Matt, because obviously Mike cannot have the same italicized intro to his chapter like the other characters can. These serve for those characters as, kind of traveling into their past, traveling into their memory, and then that's what gets us to 1958. But Mike already remembers his past for the most part. He stayed in Derry. He has this entire memory of growing up there and what happened. So his chapters must be different. And I think the clever thing King does here is actually this exactly follows the only other Mike chapter we've had so far, because the only other Mike chapter we've had so far was that first Derry interlude, and it was an epistolary chapter. So here we go. Like, actually, King has not eschewed from his structural formatting at all yet. He's just using the established format to begin his Mike chapter, just like he's doing with the other character chapters. It's very clever.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool and fun that Mike is kind of just situated differently, and so he can use his point of view chapters stylistically differently. I like that a lot.
So the chapter opens with this very ominous line: "They weren't all found. No, they weren't all found. And from time to time, wrong assumptions were made." And as we kind of gestured towards last week, and I think you already said, this is a rough chapter, right? This is an emotional, pretty devastating chapter. And as we go through the disappearance of Eddie, the murder of his little brother Dorsey, and the father responsible for the latter, but not the former, it's a tough sit. It's not a lot of fun reading at the very start of this thing.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think I've said this before, but the horror of Stephen King novels isn't necessarily, the decapitations committed by the swamp monsters. I mean, that's definitely horrifying, obviously, but there's a kind of thrill to the supernatural horror because it's willfully excessive. It's intentionally over the top. It's not real. You can enjoy it kind of in the same way that you enjoy like the Predator murdering a bunch of guys with an assortment of science fiction weapons. It's almost satisfying. Whereas the real horror, the horror rooted in things that may have happened somewhere in the world, are sickening, and to my mind actually horrifying. And I think that's it's funny, I almost like gloss over these when I think back over all the books that we've read. I don't tend to think about stuff like this, but it's in like all of them, and by it I mean, I don't know, depictions of domestic violence or violence against children or just really awful, like realistic, terrible things that happen to people. So yeah, that's what makes this rough, obviously.
Yeah, and that's the main focus of the epistolary section, really, right? I mean, there's no Pennywise here quite yet. There's no monsters. There's just humans and their human follies, and it is some of the most horrifying stuff to read, for sure.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
It does another thing for us as well, I think, Matt. It shows us kind of a window into the world of crime in Derry, and we kind of get to see how things play out. This epistolary style, we move through, it moves us all the way through the summer. So we actually reach the end of the summer of 58, which is where the majority of our story is taking place right now, and move beyond that into the quote unquote future. And so we kind of through these article clippings get to see how the stuff eventually all plays out. And we get to see, how things start with one boy goes missing, then hit the trail for him dries up pretty quickly. Things shift to his younger brother. We get to see, how teachers knew about the kind of abusive stepfather, but decided to, or specifically in the teacher's case, were specifically told to do nothing about this kind of stuff. This is how this evil kind of ferments and grows.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in that beat, where the teacher, practically looks the reader in the face and says, yeah, they told us not to intervene in obvious abuse situations. This was the actual school policy. Kind of felt
Mm-hmm.
like Stephen King wanted us to know this specific fact about, America, that maybe you didn't know. Maybe you didn't know that there was, explicit policy that was essentially protecting abusers for probably years and years.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to think we've gotten better about this. I know the schools my wife has taught out, they're definitely that policy does not exist anymore. But I'm sure in a lot of places they do look the other way at a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
It's a lot easier than getting involved,
yeah, absolutely.
Um, this is hard, Matt. So this is the part that absolutely just broke me. This is a section of reading where we have a giant spooky bird, a giant swamp monster, and a leper, and the scariest, most horrifying thing that caused me to have to put the book down and step away a little bit is the stepfather describing murdering his small child.
Yeah.
This part right here. Did he say anything to you before he passed out? Whitson asked. He said, "Stop, Daddy. I'm sorry. I love you," Macklin replied. "Did you stop?" "Eventually." This is, we talked about this back in The Shining, right? We talked about this idea that, sometimes you get so frustrated and angry with your kid. They're doing something you specifically told them not to, and they're just doing it. You get so frustrated. But like the writing here allows me to close my eyes and imagine my child crying out saying, "I love you, I'm sorry, please stop," like
Mm-hmm.
while this violence is being committed. And it just broke me. I just
Yeah.
it's one of those things that is so visceral and so immediate that it's just no, 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 no. I couldn't handle it. I could not
Yeah.
handle it at all.
Yeah, I think your kid is closer to this age too, so it was
Yeah.
probably
Definitely.
even worse for you. I mean, I definitely had a lot of the same reaction you're doing. Although it's funny how things shift, because none of my kids are small enough where this scenario could really play out exactly this way. I'm not saying that diminishes from my ability to imagine it. It's just I think it is interesting how just the absolute specificity of how old your kid is at a given moment can really actually matter when it
Yeah.
comes to this stuff. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
I mean, it makes you sick. I I think one amazing, horrible detail about all this is that King has chosen to have the murder be committed with this recoilless hammer,
Yeah.
which is uh, I, I I was thinking about why choose that, right? Like, why not just have it be a hammer? A hammer's plenty horrible enough. And I was thinking, well, when I think about the experience of actually reading this, I was like, well, I've never used a recoilless hammer personally, and so I was kind of imagining, yeah, what would it feel like to swing a hammer that's full of ball bearings so that it doesn't recoil, so it doesn't kick back when you, and I was like, and then as I was thinking that, I was like, yeah, and of course, naturally, I'm gonna mentally simulate what it's like to slam that into a person's flesh, because that's the thing that is being depicted here.
Mm-hmm.
And so King tricked me into imagining the tactile feeling of smacking a hammer into a child, which I might not have necessarily done if it was just a normal claw hammer.
Yeah. No, that's a really fantastic point. Yeah.
Just making it be a very specific and unusual type of weapon force you to sort of put yourself in the situation more than I probably otherwise would have. Another thing, which I don't know if there's anything at all to this really, but I was looking up pictures of recoilless hammers because I don't know that I've ever even seen one, although I get the concept. And the first models that popped up on Amazon, they look just like roque mallets or croquet mallets in terms of being like a long, thin handle, relatively speaking, thin handle, and then a very a very thin, long head, which was symmetric on both, both ends in all the models I looked at. My first thought was like, oh man, it looks just like the rope mallets from The Shining. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. I guess that it's like, I don't know, King has some association with striking a child with a mallet of a very particular shape,
Yeah.
perhaps, or maybe I'm projecting. I don't know.
No, I think you're right there. I mean, and it definitely is more of a mallet than a hammer when you look at pictures of it, for sure. In fact,
Mhm.
I think one of the alternate names for a recoilless hammer is a dead blow hammer, which
Mm.
is perfect actually for what's going on here. Yeah, I mean, like, just you're so right with all this, the specificity of it. Like, it's such a King thing to be like, no, it's not just a hammer, it's a recoilless hammer. It's specific, it's designed to not knock back, like, and then to put that in your in your mind's eye as you're also imagining hitting a human being with this thing, and
Mhm.
them, the tiny small child, like crying out to you and saying stop it, and saying I love you, saying I'm sorry,
Mhm.
like, it's this great amount of specificity. This is how I know, like, I could never actually be a violent person, even if I wanted to, because, like, the second someone, like, let's say someone screws me over and I'm like incredibly angry, right? Like, someone kills my child or something, and I'm incredibly angry and I'm fighting back at them, and like the first time they say I'm sorry, please stop, that's just gonna destroy me, and gonna I'm gonna be done. I'm not gonna be able to do it anymore. So, like, it's I like, basically what I'm saying is, if the apocalypse comes, I'm in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I think in a zombie context, you're going to need to be able to cut somebody in half with a sword. So
Yeah.
you got to work on
Well,
that,
I mean,
man.
I think the trick is, hopefully the zombie won't be able to say, please stop. I'm
Uh huh.
sorry. I
Yeah.
love you.
Or yeah. No, that's a good point. But like, what if the zombie was like on your ladder and you told the zombie not to be on your ladder?
Yeah. I mean, then it gets what's coming to it.
Exactly. There you go.
So Richard Macklin confesses to the murder of his younger son, but says he did nothing to Eddie. And so, as time moves on, the missing Eddie Corcoran, I said it right the first time and then I messed it up, is never found. In 1967, Richard commits suicide after seeing his missing and, per Richard, dead son, which is an interesting little bit here, right, Matt? It seems like the dude got less than 10 years in prison before being paroled after beating his toddler to death with a hammer.
Yeah, I think. I guess that's part and parcel with a lot of what we're saying about this world, this town.
Yeah.
That it's just a place where violence and this sort of everyday horror is so normalized that it's like, yeah, it's the kind of thing that happens. Like,
Hmm.
poor guy. It's almost like there's like, this poor guy, like lost his son. Isn't that sad? It's like, what? um,
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting because the book does kind of make Richard come off as, doesn't make him come off well. Doesn't make you the reader feel like poor Richard, but it does make him come off as genuinely contrite, in my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
he actually seemed to regret having done it, and not just because he went to jail. Like, he actually, maybe part of it was the voice actor kind of selling it, but it just seemed like, yeah, this was a guy who really wished that he hadn't snapped and killed his kid, and like, it didn't come off as fake. I guess I thought that was interesting because, there's kind of two ways to play that, right? When you have a character murder a kid, you have the character be actually contrite afterward, or you have the character be obviously not actually contrite and just actually a monster. And I
Yeah.
guess to me, there's something more awful about the idea that, like, there are people who like, they really can't control their violent impulses, and so they're capable of doing something this horrible and then being like, oh god, what did I do?
Yeah.
Like, there's something just like, just another coat of you know shit varnish on the shit sandwich. It's
Well,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's this desperate attempt to label everyone who would be capable of doing something as an absolute monster, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
we want that to be the case because then it allows us to understand them, right? Whereas this was just a guy. He was a shitty guy. He was a violent guy. He was an abusive guy, but he was just a guy. What does it take for someone to kill their toddler? Well,
Yeah.
It's just is a human
Mhm.
being who will look at that event afterwards and go, "Oh man, I did fuck up." I mean, to be fair, he didn't seem to get really repentant about it until after he was caught. Now, I don't think it was just prison, but there several years went by until he was caught. It's just the his other son going missing is what caused this whole thing to surface. Who knows how long it would have gone on, how long he would have gotten away with it, I guess, if that hadn't happened.
Yeah, that's true. But between that and our previous chapter with Joe Rogan, I forget his real name. Um I'm talking about um uh the theme of domestic violence is what I'm trying to point out here. That the idea that we have multiple characters who beat their spouses or their children, and we're probably going to get more of that as we move into the book. And I'm just thinking, like, the book definitely is saying something about the idea that nobody ever really tells these guys, "Hey, that's super fucked up. You should stop."
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
they're sort of enabled on all sides, or at the very least, they're not really. It's a culture. What I'm trying to say is the book is saying that there's a culture that fosters and perpetuates and allows this behavior.
Yeah.
And so when the guy does accidentally beat his kid to death, he's almost like, "Oh shit, I didn't know that I could kill the kid. I was just doing what I always do, which is beat the shit out of them, which is what
Right.
happened to me when I was a kid." And again, I'm not trying to really extend sympathy to the child murdering monster, but also at the same time, it's like the book is saying that it's a societal problem, and it's a dairy problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's very specifically and almost textually, beating your children is not a problem. The problem is that he went too far this
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
That's the issue at hand here.
Mhm.
And it's such an interesting choice, right? That's the one thing I was thinking about. Like, we have this setup. We have this kid named Eddie who happens to be the exact same age as the rest of our group, which again is, I think, a very intentional choice. He goes missing. This kid goes missing, reveals this other horrible buried thing, and then poor Eddie just kind of just disappears from this whole thing, right?
Mhm.
Like, this epistolary thing is not the story of the missing Eddie Corcoran. It is the story of Eddie's father, Eddie's disappearance, starting this chain of his father getting revealed to the person he is.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting choice, because it didn't have to be that way. Because you could also do a thing where, well, they pinned the death of Eddie on him too. They decided that he was a man. If he could do this to one son, he must have done it to the other, and so he went to jail for the death of both kids, and he rotted in jail forever, and then eventually committed suicide in prison. But that's not how it goes. They don't actually ever pin Eddie's death on him.
Yeah, and I mean, even our character who finds the bloody trail doesn't, figure out what happened. It's just
Yeah.
like it's just the knife that he finds. What like we don't even know if anything's going to come of that specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea that this is a horrible, horrible murder of an innocent child that just not only goes unsolved, but unnoticed.
Yeah, yeah, right.
I love how this bit ends, though. It's like the most horribly depressing way of just putting a capper on this thing. In a brief court proceeding in 1966, the boy's mother had her son declared legally dead so she could enter into possession of Edward Corcoran's savings account. The account contained a sum of $16.
Yeah. How fucking depressing.
Jesus Christ. Oh
Yeah.
my God. That's less than silver cost, Matt.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a good comparison actually. It's like, yeah, it's so poetic. I love it.
So from here, we move away from the epistolary style into a narratized account of what actually happened to Eddie. Turns out he died all the way back on June 19th, which is, that's a date. It's not a date that
It's
means anything to Stephen King yet, but
not yet.
there it
But
is.
it crops up a weird amount of times.
So I really like this part here. I want to read it to you and then we can talk about it. He died as Ben Hanscom sat at home watching TV with his mother, as Eddie Kasprak's mother anxiously felt Eddie's forehead for signs of his favorite ailment, phantom fever, as Beverly Marsh's stepfather, a gent who bore, in temperament at least, a remarkable resemblance to Eddie and Dorsey Corcoran's stepfather, lifted a high stepping kick into the girl's derriere and told her to get out there and dry those goddamn dishes like your mother told you. As Mike Hanlon got yelled at by some high school boys, one of whom would some years later sire the fine, upstanding young homophobe John Webby Garton, passed in an old Dodge, while Mike pulled weeds out of the garden beside the small Hanlon home out on the Witcham Road, not far from the farm owned by Henry Bauer's crazy father. As Richard Tozier was sneaking a look at a half-undressed girl in a copy of Gem he had found at the bottom of his father's socks and underwear drawer and getting a regular good boner, and as Bill Denbrough was throwing his dead brother's photograph album across the room in horrified unbelief. I really love this bit. I love this bit of King really reinforcing this idea of the connection between Eddie Corcoran's death and the rest of our group, right? That these are all kids. They're all 10, 11 years old. They're all in the fifth grade. He's just like the rest of them. And as he is off here dying, they're all having their own unique experiences. And his experience, we'll see here, the thing we're moving to is that every single one of these kids has had some sort of experience with Pennywise. The difference between their experience with Pennywise and between Eddie's experience with Pennywise is that they escaped theirs and he didn't.
Yeah. And it really makes you feel like he could have been one of their gang just as easily, if he had, turned right instead of left at some point. He could have ended up making the dam with them. He could be one of their crew, but didn't turn out that way. And then it makes you, I think it causes you to think, well, all of these victims of this monster are just as, they're just as much tender-hearted kids with their own lives ahead of them that didn't deserve to be killed. And it makes it all feel a lot weightier by having it connected to the other characters in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I want to introduce this here, and it's something that I think, has kind of been in the background of the last few chapters, but I think rises to prominence here, is this idea that there is something special about these kids in particular, right? That there is something pushing them, pulling them, guiding them. We've called it the voice of the turtle in the book in the past. We can call it Ka. We can call it the white Gan, whatever you want to call it. But there is something going on here. There's too many instances in these chapters alone of people feeling like, oh, I'm going to leave and turn around and go home. But no, I'm pulled, I'm pushed to this thing. So I think that's the other thing we're doing here is, we're by showing this child's death, who is in essence the same as all of them, and yet not, and yet he doesn't get away.
Yeah. It's been much more subtle with the Ka telepathy stuff than King often is, which I think is interesting. And I wonder if we're going to be consistently subtle with the telepathy stuff, or if it's going to kind of ramp up. I suspect it's going to ramp up, but I don't know.
Yeah, we'll find out. So Eddie is avoiding going home due to his bad report card, so he's out by the canal. We get to see a snapshot of Eddie's home life that the papers didn't really depict. This dangerous, angry stepfather that everyone at Eddie's house had to tiptoe around. We learn that Eddie almost gets beaten to death for letting a screen door slam too hard. And we see here that his mother has in the past tried to do something about it, but relents. And the death of Dorsey has now become a thing that her husband can kind of hold over her, that like, if you go to the hospital now, they'll know about Dorsey and then we'll all be screwed. So it's just this picture we're being painted that, we could have guessed at by the epistolary stuff, but this section allows us to see it much more intimately, much more immediate, like much more kind of horrifyingly, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's quite unpleasant. I love it.
And so Eddie finds himself alone at night, walking on the edge of the canal, imagining pushing his horrible stepfather in and watching him get sucked away down into the sewers. And at this very moment, a hand closed around Eddie's foot. I just love how matter-of-factly that sentence is written into the book. Like, Eddie is just like daydreaming about seeing his stepfather pulled away downstream in the canal, and then we do a line break, and then just a hand closed around Eddie's foot. There's just a hand there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, very matter of fact. It doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't start with the horror. It's not a suddenly Eddie saw out of the corner of his eye. It's just I agree. I really like that. It's very effective. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Especially when he looks down and sees that the hand belongs to his little brother, Dorsey, in the clothes that he was buried in, with a horrible slumped head smiling at him. Just, oh, that's good shit, man. It gets you the goosebumps for sure.
Yeah, it's great.
So Dorsey starts calling for Eddie as he takes off running away from the canal. And Matt, if this was like Ben's interaction with Pennywise, or like Bill's interaction with Pennywise, or even Mike and Eddie's, as we'll see here in a moment, that would be the end of it. He'd get away, he'd ride away, and he'd live another day. But that's not what happens here. And as Eddie runs away, he looks behind him and he sees not Dorsey anymore, but the creature from the Black Lagoon chasing him. And it's at that moment that he trips over a park bench.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about here. You know, and we haven't really talked much about this, but you know, so far we had Pennywise take on the form of the mummy from the old movie. We now have the creature from the Black Lagoon. Soon we're going to have Rodan. We're going to have the leper. And so these are all specifically things that the kids are familiar with and scared of. Like this kid knows and is scared of the creature from the Black Lagoon. So interesting that it changed though, right? Like why change? You know, why not just stay the kid's little brother? Is it because it wanted a form that was actually dangerous? Did it even have a choice in the matter? Like, did it intentionally say, I'm going to change into the creature from the Black Lagoon? Or was it more sort of a natural thing that it just happens to it? These are all questions that are in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, is it proactive or reactive in its changing? And I mean, that's a great question to ask, because as we'll see in Mike's memory of the bird a little bit here, it seems like if Pennywise was in control of that kind of stuff, that would have been a good time to take the reins, right? We'll talk about that when we get to it. But I think great questions for sure.
And also just on a more meta level, can't help but feel like this book is a kind of love letter to horror films of the 50s. Because again, we got specifically the Mummy, the creatures from the Black Lagoon, Godzilla. I'm sure we're going to get more of that kind of thing. And I really can't help but feel like King just was thinking like it would be really fun to have a movie, to have a book where basically there's children who are running away from these monsters that sort of haunted me as a child. How could I do that? And then he like worked backwards to say, well, what if there's a demon clown and it can change form? You know, I do actually think this was kind of something in his mind, right? That he wanted to accomplish this. I don't know that, but I feel like it's likely.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I don't think King likes 50s B horror sci-fi at all, Matt. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't be ridiculous.
It doesn't basically show up in every film anthology type movie that he does. Yeah.
No. Don't be silly. Come on.
I know. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I want to talk about this park bench though. This is a really fascinating little image for me here, because this is the thing that ultimately causes him to get caught. Is he's running, he looks back, he sees the creature from the Black Lagoon, he takes off, and he trips over a park bench. And the text here says, some kids had casually pushed it over earlier that evening, heading towards their homes at a run to beat the curfew. Its seat poked an inch or two out of the grass, one shade of green on another, almost invisible in the moon-driven dark. The edge of the seat smacked Eddie in the shins, causing a burst of glassy, exquisite pain. His legs flipped out behind him, and he thumped into the grass. So, just some stupid kids messing around, right? Like, they're heading on the way home. They see a bench, and they're just like, fuck it, we're gonna tip it over. And it results in a dead kid.
Yeah, and it also shows you how it was a near thing. Like the other kids, they just barely get away, and you get the sense that maybe Eddie could have gotten away if it wasn't for this one spot of bad luck in his path.
Yep. But even bad luck, yes, but like bad luck caused by chaos, caused
Yeah.
by recklessness, caused by
Negligent sort
destruction.
of. Yeah. Yeah, right. Because that's, I think, once again, I have to tie all this to the idea that Derry is just a place of, like you just said, chaos or just like pointless badness,
Hmm.
where it just, for some reason, the image of some kids just thoughtlessly knocking over a park bench is just a very Derry image based on my current understanding of this town from this book, where it's just like nobody really cares about each other. There's just this culture of I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Sure, knock over the park bench. Why not? Who cares? And then how those little acts of negligence or selfishness or what have you kind of accumulate into worse things like this.
Yeah. No, totally agree. So, of course, because of him tripping and falling, the creature gets Eddie. And even as he dies, Eddie refuses to accept that this thing standing over him is real. He's still grabbing for a zipper at its back when it rips his head off. And then we get this line as we move away from the death of Eddie. And as Eddie's picture of what it was began to fade, it began promptly to change into something else. So
Very, very interesting.
again, begging the question of that you've already asked is it controlling this change? Does it have to change away because Eddie is dead now, and so the image that Eddie was projecting on it was that of the creature from the Black Lagoon, and now it isn't?
Yeah. There's a lot of questions here. I mean, another remark I could make is that the creature starts off in the water, grabs Eddie's foot, and then Eddie runs, and then it follows him away from the water, and it kills him well away from the water, and then it drags him back to the water.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was thinking about how previously it seemed to not really be able to follow the other kids away from the water, or maybe it could have but didn't. We don't really know, and then later stuff this week, like the monster coming out of the house on Neibolt Street. Like if there's water nearby, the text doesn't make it clear that there's water nearby. I would guess there's like a well or something under the house if my theory is going to work at all. um but as it is, I mean, I guess one way of looking at this is like the creature's becoming stronger, becoming less bound to the water, perhaps. And again, I don't know how like theory crafty and nerdy to get about all this, because I don't know how like plot relevant it's gonna be. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
I think I just like the idea that there are some limits to it, because otherwise you begin asking questions like, well, why doesn't it just go into their bedrooms and eat them while they're sleeping, right? It's like, okay, well,
Sure.
if it has some physical limitations, then that just adds a bit of complexity, which is useful in a narrative sense. But I mean, we know that King doesn't usually like to have like strict rules. So
Yeah.
um so I don't know why I'm spending so much effort on it, but I guess I am, just because pattern matching is fun.
No, I think it is, and I think these are fair questions to ask. And again, I think the bird encounter with Mike Hanlon is one that almost demands that you ask questions like this, because
Mhm.
like the central question of that one is, why does he survive that encounter, or how does he survive that encounter?
Mhm.
And we have some answers we can think about, and we'll talk about them when we get to it. But no, what I'm just trying to say here is I think that's very fair to sit here and say, wonder what's going on here. I wonder what the limitations are, what the rules are. And yeah, I don't want to like specifically tell you not to expect answers, but I think King. So
And I think the King would be aware that his readers are going to be trying to put pieces together and figure things out. So
yeah,
that's why I'm bothering to articulate these thoughts that are going through my head.
sure. No, it makes sense. All right, so from here, we find ourselves with a young Mike Hanlon waking up from a nightmare. Mike gets up, grabs some food, and for some reason that not even he's entirely sure about, heads to the spot of Eddie's murder. The atmosphere of this scene is actually pretty wonderful, Matt. Like it's straight out of a horror scene. I love when King talks about the acoustic quality of the fog as Mike rides through the early morning. It lets you hear the cars that are around you, but you're not able to see them. I just really like that whole setting he's creating as Mike heads out here to the canal.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So Mike manages to find a knife with Eddie's initials on it, and he notices the park bench Eddie tripped over. And here is, for me, when the metaphor of the symbol of the park bench becomes complete, because Mike looks down at this and it says, "He righted it, setting its iron footings back into the holes they had made over a period of months and years." I absolutely love the word usage here, that he didn't just stand the park bench back up, but he righted it.
Yep. Straightening bad pictures in strange hotel rooms. That's our Mike.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
in empty, strange hotel rooms, I think is the most important thing. Yeah, no, that's great. That's the exact same image that I thought about when I was thinking about this. And this idea that Mike and perhaps all of our characters here are people who are going to right the world, right? That this is their job, their duty. This is why Mike is here. Why was Mike summoned here at this moment? To do what? Well, he's got to right things, you know? That bench caused the death of a child. It shouldn't have been that way. And so here we're going to send Mike here to right it.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's the special thing about these kids, absolutely, is despite the fact that they were raised in dairy, they don't seem to have the, I don't know, the dairy mindset. They haven't been beaten down. They haven't been made into people who either don't care or actively enjoy breaking stuff. They still have that instinct to right and to bring order to things. Mm-hmm. I think even the dam can be viewed as a version of that, where it's like admittedly they're doing it in kind of a chaotic way because there doesn't need to be a dam there, but it's like you see this chaotic river system and you're like, I want to impose some kind of order on this. I want to impose some kind of control on this chaotic world that I see. No,
100%. And I don't think it's an accident that the event of the dam is capped off by this event of Bill, working up the courage to tell the rest of the group his experience with Georgie and with the photo album, because that to me, this idea that someone in Derry is going to stand up and say, I saw this thing that happened and I feel like it means something and I need to talk about it. Like, that is really like the driving incident that's going to push our characters forward from this point, because, it snowballs from there, where Ben tells his story, Eddie tells his story, Stanley is about to tell his story before he's interrupted, and that's where our reading will end off. But no, this is the event, this is the moment, and so I think you're absolutely right that the writing of the park bench, the building of the dam, and the confession of the events that these characters have witnessed are part of that whole same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great.
So Mike also sees the tracks made by Pennywise dragging Eddie into the canal and patches of blood, and he builds a story of a murder from a Hitchcock movie, he says. A guess that is almost eerily too correct. And as he stands here at the edge of the canal, he recalls a nightmare of his own from earlier in the spring. And that's when we head back in time to Mike's bird encounter. But before we get there, King does what I love him to do sometimes. He spends some time here, some pages, really establishing who Mike Hanlon, the child, is. And it seems like he's got a pretty picturesque childhood, right, Matt? He loves his life on the farm. He loves his dad. There's this very poetic talking about their family waking up with the spring, as they're farmers, and so they get most active in the spring and summer times. And he loves his dad a lot too. This is some of the part that I thought was most powerful to me. We see here a loon cried up on the far side of the Candusticig River in a dusky sunset that had turned the water a deep orange red. It was a lonely sound, so lonely that it made Mike's tired arms tighten with goose flesh. I love you, Daddy, he said suddenly, feeling his love so strongly the tears stung his eyes. Why, I love you too, Mikey, his father said, and hugged him tight in his strong arms. Just really beautiful, happy stuff, right?
Yeah. It's delightful. It's utterly heartwarming. It's in a story full of extremely dogshit parents and spouses and such. This is definitely a remarkable breath of fresh air. Very interesting. Like, Mike's dad, he's not just an acceptable parent like Ben's mom is. He's positively great. He's almost like the most uncomplicatedly great Stephen King parent that I can remember easily.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those interesting things where we want to draw comparisons. You know, we have two characters standing at basically the exact same spot on the edge of the canal, thinking about their past. We have Eddie who's thinking about his piece of shit father, and we have Mike who's thinking about his wonderful father. You know, and that's drawing a stark difference between the two of them. And I'm not saying it's because he had a shitty father that Eddie got killed, but um, but maybe I am saying that a little bit here. You know, this is not that it's Eddie's fault, but this is kind of the curse of bad parenting
Yeah.
that leaves people.
Yeah, if you don't have a loving kind of environment backing you up and supporting you, then when the monster comes calling, you don't have either the mental or the physical tools, or however you want to think about it,
Sure.
to beat it off.
There is just one problem though, Matt. Mike here enjoys peanut butter and onion sandwiches. And that's unfortunately just kind of unforgivable.
And it's specifically raw onions, right?
I don't think it says, but I would assume yes.
I'm almost curious.
There's a part of me that wants to try this.
Because I can imagine a nice, like a nice griddled onion might actually go well with peanut butter, but like a slice of raw onion on peanut butter.
Are we thinking like a yellow sweet onion or like a red onion? What are we thinking here?
I would guess that it's a sweet onion. That's be my guess. But a red onion, I feel like that would just be, you would just taste onion. You wouldn't even taste peanut butter.
Yeah, I mean, think about it here. What if you throw some onions in a pan, you caramelize them for a bit,
sure,
and then you slap them on top of some peanut butter on bread? That could be good.
I mean, I'd eat those onions by themselves at that point. So sure, that'd be good.
Do we have to try this? We're gonna have to try this.
I think we have to try this. I think we have to try a few permutations, though. I'm gonna give it to my kids and be like, "Why are we doing this, Daddy?" Well,
just eat the onion.
It's a recipe that I found in a book.
Okay, we got to move on, but please let me know how that goes.
All right.
So we see here that one other thing that Mike's father likes to do is send him on these exploratory missions to learn more about Derry and its history. I love how we can kind of see the Mike, the librarian that he becomes based on this one simple act of his father. Like he instills in him this love of history, and also instills in him this desire to want to find the truth at the bottom of things. Right? You know, like this idea. I really do love the scene where he takes him to the police house and sees the chair that they put vagrants in, this basic torture device, definitely not constitutional torture device that they're putting human beings in to try to convince them to leave town.
Yeah, it's just a chair. It's just kind of an uncomfortable chair. No, like it's funny. I've never heard of that before, but that totally makes sense that would be a thing, right?
Yeah, and it makes total sense that like Mike is a person who doesn't want to shy away from the dark history of his town, and this is something that his dad instilled in him from a very early age. He's like the idea that no, we're going to go learn about this chair, and you're going to sit in it, so you know what it feels like, what it feels like to do this to people.
Yeah, he really wants us to understand the world.
Yeah, and this is a really fascinating thing about this, right? Because I do want to just point out real quick here. Like, we know that Mike and his family are Black. But at least the text here in this moment doesn't really focus on it that much. Like there's interesting little bits at the edges of this where like we learn that the other farmers don't really like Mike's family, don't really like his farm. And there's this one bit where Mike's dad doesn't seem to like the police chief at all that much, but we don't really know why. But I think we can carefully make the assumption that a place that's bad for gay people in 1985 is probably not great for Black people in 1958. You know, I think that's a fair assumption to make. But it's interesting the way in which that's not really a factor in this part of Mike's story so far. Like, Stephen King did not really pepper in anything very specific. There's some dots you can connect, but anything very specific about Mike's Blackness and how that changes how people in town interact with him. And I'm not saying that's not going to come, I'm just saying that like it's interesting that is lacking here. It seems to be painting this like this really rosy, happy childhood first before we complicate that.
I mean, if anything, the part of his story that kind of jumped out to me from between the cracks was the poverty specifically. Because like they have this truck, for example. We spent a lot of time talking about this truck where they'd have to like push the truck down the road with one of them pushing, one of them trying to get the truck to start, and sometimes it wouldn't even work. And like it was so incredibly janky, and like the door wasn't like attached to, I don't even remember all the details, but like it seemed like everything about their life was cobbled together through ingenuity and perseverance. And Mike sort of, the way he experiences this is like, we're so resourceful and I get to do these things to help my dad. But sort of objectively, it's like, oh wow, this is like absolutely crushing poverty, and it makes you appreciate Mike's father even more, that Mike's father is sort of having this positive attitude about his station in life, and sort of conveying that attitude to his son, such that his son isn't constantly hyper aware of how hard their life is.
And it's one of the like the fun ignorances of childhood, right? That like Mike looks at this horribly broken down truck that they obviously haven't replaced because they can't afford it, and just sees it as one thing that they do on their checklist of getting ready for the spring. And he doesn't see it for the poverty that it is. He doesn't see it for what it means. He's not old enough to yet, right? And this is another example where perhaps we have a character on the cusp of walking across that threshold and beginning to understand the world in a way they haven't yet, but Mike isn't quite there yet, or wasn't, at least in these flashbacks.
Yeah, right.
So Mike heads out to the site of the Kitchener Iron Works, which we know from his interlude chapter is the site of a horrific Easter egg hunt explosion. He finds the abandoned ironworks creepy. Then you've got the sound of wind blowing over this downed smokestack, reminding him of the movie Rodan he had watched earlier with his dad. Which, by the way, Matt, fun Rodan fact for you. The character's name in the original Japanese movie was actually Radon, as in pterodon, because that makes sense. Pterodon.
Okay. Or so, like radon gas, the radioactive gas, which is connected. No.
See, what happened was they were localizing it in the United States, and they said, those dumb Americans are going to get this confused with the radon gas, so we got to change it. So they changed it to Rodan. But I'm trying to imagine this scenario in which the translators and localizers were like, imagine someone sitting down to watch this movie about a giant fucking dinosaur bird terrorizing the countryside, and like hearing its name was radon, even if that's not the way it's pronounced, because it would probably radon is probably the way they would actually pronounce it. And being like, wait a minute, is that a bird, or is it some sort of slightly radioactive gas?
Is it one of the noble gases? It doesn't look like it to me.
Well, now I'm totally out of the movie. I just don't understand. Like it just seems to me like this isn't actually a problem, and they could have just left the name the same, and it would have at least made sense.
I was down to watch the giant radioactive lizard fight the giant pterodactyl, but radon. Wow.
That's an element.
Yeah. Well, no, that sounds dumb. I didn't know that, and I don't know why anybody does anything really. I guess Rodan is a cool name though, so I can't really complain. It's not like Rodan is a terrible name. It is funny that it's like there was no really good reason to change it, but Radon.
I wonder if it's one of those chicken and egg things. Do you think it's a good name now because you're like used to it, and that's like just the name of I guess giant bird from Godzilla?
Like, I think if you'd asked me before I knew all this trivia, I'd be like, yeah, it's like a cool sounding Japanese name. Okay. And you're like, it's not even a Japanese name.
I do wonder who makes these localization decisions. Like, was it a group of Japanese folks, or was it a group of English speaking folks in America saying like, no way, no way.
Yeah, you can
This is
usually tell.
yeah.
In this case, I can't tell.
This is like when they gave us a different Super Mario Brothers 2 because they didn't think we were good enough for the Japanese version.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exactly the same.
Exactly.
So for some reason, Mike feels himself pulled towards the cellar hole, the one place that his father told him not to go. Again, this is another instance of our characters being kind of pushed and prodded places. Inside it, Mike finds a giant bird. There's just a giant bird sitting here. And we see here almost immediately that the book tells us that this is a very big, but just very bird looking bird with an orange breast where, maybe some orange clown puffs would go.
Uh-huh.
But interestingly, this bird is not Rodan. Does not look like a giant pterodactyl, which would be in line with the trend that we've seen from Pennywise so far, right? Like, he looked exactly like the creature from the Black Lagoon. He looked exactly like the mummy from the Mummy movie, just what that character would look like if it were real. Mike does say here that he feels that it has the spirit of Rodan, but why not just be a giant monster flying dinosaur, Matt? Like, if you're truly just shapeshifty Pennywise that can be anything that people are scared of, why not do that? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly the question that I had. I don't have an answer, obviously. Again, it's like there's kind of two easy choices. It's like either it's due to the limitations of the creature itself and what it's capable of doing, like it can't turn into Rodan for some reason, or it's like a choice, and it's like it's choosing to turn into a big bird instead of turning into a pteranodon bird. That's and and like which one of those and why, I don't know. I have no idea, but I agree that is the question that's on my mind.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you. I just thought it'd be fun to ask you and force you to not be able to answer it.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, like the way this whole thing plays out is so fascinating, right? Because the bird, we see here immediately, the bird takes off and it chases after Mike, who sprints to hide inside the smokestack. The bird follows him, slowly forcing himself into it after him. Eventually, it gets stuck. The stack gets too small, and he can't come any further. And this is the point where we go, "Hey, aren't you a shapeshifter?
Uh-huh.
Can't you just turn into like a smaller bird or anything else,
Uh-huh.
or like a spooky clown, maybe?"
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it changed while chasing the other kid, and that seemed like a kind of opportunistic change. We don't know that it was, but it's like he turned from a small, weak kid into a big monster, so presumably so he could chase him more effectively. I mean, I guess if we're gonna, since we're dwelling on this already, I guess one of my thoughts is like, he changes form right as he's getting out of the water, basically, previously. Oh no, he changes form again after he kills the kid, and he hasn't gotten back in the water. I was going to say he can only change form when he's close to the water, and in this case, he's obviously not close to the water because we don't see any water in this scene. We only see, there's like a depression underneath the whatever the building is where the explosion came from, but I don't think we actually see water there. The closest, like my guess would just be like, well, it's probably connected to some sewage piping or something, because you're gonna need a lot of pipes to hook up an ironworks for various reasons, but that's not. I don't know. My water theory is getting kind of flimsy, I admit.
I'm enjoying this. I just want you to know I'm enjoying it.
Because there's exceptions to the water theory. We'll see, man. We'll see. I'm not abandoning it. I'm just saying we're adding epicycles to the theory. It's always bad.
No, I mean, it's fun to think about, because I think you're right what you said earlier, that the book is kind of prompting you to think about these things a little bit here, because we've had enough interactions with Pennywise now to start trying to look at trends and consistencies amongst them, right? Like it is interesting the ways in which he appears specifically as a clown to some people, but not to other people. I mean, one of the things we'll see here that like Pennywise, like the bird opens its mouth and on its tongue were the tumbleweeds of orange puffs on it, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
so there are parts of it, and that I think that serves as like a good shortcut for the author to tell you, the reader, is like, yeah, if you're wondering, this giant bird is also the clown. Just in case you weren't clear on that.
Right.
Here, let me make it as immediate and clear as possible, because there's one thing that King does consistently in this book. I don't know if you've noticed this so far, but my God, just like search in this book for orange puffs, because every time he talks about Pennywise in this book, he mentions that he's got these orange puffs going down the front of his shirt. It's just like the one consistent thing that we always see in the descriptions of Pennywise.
That's great. I mean, I love that you can, like, orange puffs in isolation is the most innocuous two words in the English language. It's like, but like the word puff, right? It's associating that with this creature, this eldritch monstrosity. It's so, I love that. I love it when King does this, where he kind of chooses something that is almost like intentionally disarming and unthreatening, and he makes it be one of the signature things of some monster. I swear he's done this before, although I can't think of an example right this second. And it just makes it, I don't know, it makes it hit harder somehow.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the idea of doing a clown in the first place. I think clowns have become, in large part thanks to this book, a thing that you would not describe as innocuous and innocent and harmless anymore. But perhaps at the time, that was why he grabbed on this image specifically.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So we see here that Mike is stuck at the back of the smokestack, and he's picked up some tiles that he's found, and he's throwing them at the bird as the bird is trying to get in. And then this happens. Please God, he screamed, and was totally unaware that he had cried out loud. He threw another piece of tile, and this time his throw was more powerful. He felt, he told the others much later, as if someone were behind him at that moment, and that someone had given his arm a tremendous push. And this time there was no feathery thud. Instead, there was a splatting sound, the sound of a kid's hand might make slapping into the surface of a bowl of half-solidified jello. So Mike, with the power of God, nails the bird in the eye and causes it to back off away from the entrance to the stack.
I mean, that's very Dark Tower, the idea that when you call upon God, when you call upon the greater force of goodness in the universe, that you can get a little power boost. So sure, yeah, that works.
Yeah, so I mean, it becomes really apparent very quickly that there's something watching over these kids, right? There's something keeping. I mean, like, you can look back at Ben's chapter and it, a little more random, but like, he specifically says he was saved by the bell tolling at that precise moment. Here it's a little more textual, that there's some force helping them. I think when we get to Eddie's chapter, he gets this onset of, as we've already been established, psychosomatic asthma right at the moment that the leper appears in the window. And if he had not been pulled back at that moment because of his asthma, he would have been perhaps immediately grabbed. So it becomes just very apparent that like something's protecting these kids.
Yeah, or trying to. It doesn't seem to have enough power that it can just solve the problem. Obviously, it's a near thing. Which
is another Kingism, right? This idea that like the powers of good and evil almost fight in these proxy wars. Where they can like pick sides and recruit, but almost never can directly engage with each other. Kind of like the Iliad.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Perfect. Yeah, and also I guess one other thing to note about this scene is that this is the only time I can remember where anybody hurts Pennywise. They actually he does effectively fight back. It's not just running away.
Very true. It does seem to actually affect him, because that's kind of how the scene ends, right? The bird pulls out, it lands on top of the smokestack and just kind of walks around there for a bit, and then eventually just flies off. and leaves him alone. And Mike is able to escape and get back to his bike and then home to his dad.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah, obviously, like, I mean, I guess that's the question for you, Matt. Like, why did the bird back off here?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's definitely something related to like places where it feels comfortable and where it has power, and places where it doesn't, and maybe it just can't linger in places that are too far away from its um, sources of power, or its home, or however you want to view it.
Sure.
You know, because again, I think fundamentally that it all comes down to like, why doesn't it just, surprise them at any old random place? Why does it have to surprise them at these particular places?
Yeah.
And it's like, there's got to be, it has to be something to do with location. Even if my water theory isn't correct, it has to be something having to do with specific locations. I mean, there's definitely something to the water, like, but it's not, maybe it's not as limiting as I'm imagining it to be. God damn it.
I am not laughing for any reason other than I am enjoying this very much. I'm not. I just want to be clear about that.
Okay,
I'm not calling you ridiculous by laughing. I'm just enjoying it.
Okay, good.
So his trip down memory lane over, Mike leaves the scene of the crime. But he himself is chased by something, right, Matt? Like he gets this real feeling in this moment that he's being chased by something very fish smelling, the same smell that Eddie felt right before he was attacked by. So is Pennywise once again the creature from the Black Lagoon here for some reason?
Maybe. I mean, yeah, isn't that weird, right? That's funny. Yeah, is he? Because one might think like, well, he would have changed back into Rodan Bird because it's Mike, but it's like, no, he's not in this setting. It's a setting dependent transformation. I don't know. God damn it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just enjoying asking you these questions. Maybe we will circle around to them in a future date. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Okay, great. How mysterious.
All right, we move on to chapter 7, The Dam in the Barrens. Our final chapter this week has us move into another adult member of the group, good old Eddie Kasprick. We begin, like the previous two chapters, with an italicized recount of Eddie's journey up to Derry. We see here that Eddie has on his drive north, unlike the others, he is driving and he has reached Boston and is continuing his way up to Maine while being, quote, poisoned by his own memories, which I just loved that quote a whole lot.
Yeah, me too. There's something very beautiful about all the italicized interludes. It just really puts me in a frame of mind of like, even though there's nothing in these characters' pasts that reminds me of my own past, it's just very kind of floaty, nostalgic way of writing that makes me start thinking about my own childhood,
Yeah. It is really remarkable the way in which these sections have just a completely entirely different tone from the ones where we see them as kids, right? Even if there's still scary stuff in both of them and it's still overall horror, is the way King writes these is, I think you're right, a little more floaty, a little like specifically trying to generate the feeling of nostalgia while also this feeling of the unknown, of returning to your past. Like really, I think especially with Eddie, the thing it captures the most is like, I don't know, I remember like the drives home to places I hadn't been in a while. You haven't been back home in a long time. That drive, as you're like driving by the things that you recognize from growing up, has this really powerful effect on you. It's like, oh yeah, that restaurant. Oh, that place closed down to someone new. Oh yeah, I remember that and that and that. And although Eddie hasn't actually made it into Derry yet, like I think all the italicized chapters have that feeling because they're doing that in their heads, not physically yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do learn here that Eddie seems to have this naturally great sense of direction, something that was true way back when he was a kid and remains true today as he easily navigates one of the most confusing cities in the entire world, which, no shade to any Boston listeners out there. I love the city of Boston. I love it so much, but it's confusing as fuck, and I hate driving in it so much. I don't know if you've ever gotten the chance to drive in Boston, Matt, but it's awful. It's awful. I hate it.
No, I've never driven. I've taken the public transit there, which is um, relatively straightforward, but simpler,
Yeah.
obviously, than driving for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool that he has the superpower of having a sense of direction. Um, probably probably come into play later when he's underground
It's
or
not
something.
just a sense of direction. It's like a super sense of
Okay,
direction.
super sense of direction.
I think what the text says is that he always manages to guess the lane he's going to need to be in for the next, mix master change miles ahead of time and is
Uh,
always correct.
so does he twirl his finger in the air before he does this, or does he just know?
Um, sure,
Well,
Matt. He twirls
this
his finger.
and then he sees the line.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Stop it. Stop it.
No, it's fun. I mean, again, this is the subtlety, right, of this book, because I feel like maybe it's because we read The Shining relatively recently, and by relatively recently I mean within the last couple of books.
It was all the way back in January.
When did we? Yeah, but what have we read between The Stand and okay, whatever. Anyway,
Between
the
the
point is
stand and now?
no, between The Shining. I was thinking about The Shining specifically because The Shining is
Between The
obviously
Shining and now, we've read a short story collection and The Long Walk. That's it.
okay. There you go. All right. So the point, though, is like The Shining is the one I keep thinking about when I'm thinking about The Shining for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
And so that was a book that was very explicit about its magic and psychic stuff. The Stand is also pretty explicit about magic and psychic stuff eventually, although it takes some time to get there. And I guess I'm just noting that, you know, one could read this book without even thinking twice about the fact that Eddie has a really good sense of space and sense of direction. You could just be like, "Oh, cool, he's got a skill." But it's like
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's Stephen King, I'm like, it's probably magic. It's probably low key shining powers going on here.
No, I mean, you're so right here. It is really interesting because obviously this is a book that is not holding back with the idea that monsters exist, right? We have a shape shifting monster that's hunting children, but on the other side of the coin, it is it is being very non explicit with everything else that's going on. We have these vague mentions to the turtle, and I think Mike says something about like we've been chosen, we're supposed to be like, that kind of thing. And again, these weird pulls the kids are feeling to be certain places at certain times. Like, why the hell does Eddie go back under that um, under that porch? Why? Well, we don't know. He feels like he wants to, and even sometimes that stuff can just be like explained away, right? Like, you don't have to have magical turtle influence to see why Eddie might have been weirdly interested in this dark, scary place.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So as Eddie thinks about his past, he thinks about Bill. We see here it says he supposes he would have died for Bill back then if he had been required. If Bill had asked him, Eddie simply would have responded, "Sure, Big Bill. You got a time in mind yet?" I think this is actually one of like the big main ideas of this chapter and maybe this week's episode as a whole, Matt, that this idea of Bill as like the leader of the group.
Mhm.
And leader in a really interesting way. Because it's not as if Bill like, wakes up in the morning and says, "I'm going to be the leader of these other kids. I know what's best for our group. I come up with the best ideas. I'm the idea person." Like, he doesn't seem to consciously do this at all. It just seems to be this aura that he gives off.
Mhm.
And part of that is kindness. Like, I love what Eddie says here about him. It says he remembers that he loved Bill Denbrow. He remembers that well enough. Bill never made fun of his asthma. Bill never called him a little sissy queer boy. He loved Bill like he would have loved a big brother or a father. Bill knew stuff to do, places to go, things to see. Bill was never up against it. When you ran with Bill, you ran to beat the devil and you laughed, but you hardly ever ran out of breath. So it's not like these are things that like Bill is consciously doing, right? Like,
Mhm.
I
It's
think
just
if
who
you
he
ask
is.
him in this moment, like, "Are you the leader?" He might say, "I guess so." Um, but I don't think he would be conscious of it in the way that Eddie is, like, very conscious of it, both here and in the present, and then also even we see back in the 50s he was as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's not like he's having to really be much of a leader in this context yet, because it's really just like, hey, what are we going to do? And then he'll be like, I have an idea, and then everybody does that.
Mhm.
Like, that's kind of how kids are, is like that. Basically, I like this is very realistic depiction of how it kind of how it works with kids, because it's just like whoever's got the ideas kind of is the leader.
Mhm.
Like that's because it's like if everybody's like, so bored, what are we going to do? And one of the kids is like, well, you want to go see a dead body? Like that, that's the leader now, right? Because they're the one with the ideas, they set the priorities, and then everybody starts getting in the habit of deferring to them, and they're kind of snowballs. But it's not quite the same dynamic as like adults. Um, and I don't think Bill, sees himself as a leader. I think he just has kind of he has these qualities that make other people want to follow him. Like bravery, like having a lot of ideas, being smart, being a problem solver, being proactive. These
Yeah.
are all admirable qualities. They're qualities that make people want to follow you.
Yeah, definitely. And I love, these things kind of just happen organically in these groups, right? It's just there's someone that's going to do it, so that
Right.
happens.
Yep.
And from here we move into Eddie thinking about the dam, which leads us back into the 50s once again, and into the next day where the three kids are working on putting that very dam together. And speaking of what we just talked about with Bill as leader, I love the way King almost immediately establishes this is not just an Eddie opinion, right? It makes sense, I think, for Eddie to look up to Bill, but they have Ben do this, right? Ben is kind of planning out the dam, and he says, "This'll work." Ben said. He also looked to Bill for the final decision, right? There's no reason for Ben to see Bill as the leader yet, outside of this aura that Bill is emanating, and that's what Ben is picking up on here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think people are sensitive to those kinds of dynamics. Some people just have a vibe, man. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. So the dam construction begins in earnest, and we see one of the big things Bill and this group does for Eddie. It makes the voices of his mother disappear. I love this moment where he's debating taking off his shoes and socks and getting into the river with the rest of them, and then his mother kind of hesitates and causes him to think about it, but then he is able to push her voice out of there and jump in.
hmm Yeah, this is the part of this week's reading that's actually just kind of beautiful and
Yeah,
heartwarming.
yeah. So with the natural talent of Ben Hanscom, the dam construction goes very, very well, actually. The kids see it begin to work almost immediately. Ben, as we've already established, somehow innately understands how this thing works. He basically reasons out the need for a dam to have sluices without even knowing the word. But the word of the day here, I think, is power. I love this thing that Eddie says here. Eddie felt uncertainty at first, then a sense of glee, and then finally an entirely new feeling, one that was at the same time weird, terrifying, and exhilarating. It was a feeling so alien to his usual state of being that he was not able to put a name to it until that night, lying in bed and looking at the ceiling and replaying the day. Power. That's what the feeling had been. Power. It was going to work, by God, and it was going to work better than he and Bill, maybe even Ben himself, had dreamed it could.
Yeah, that's beautiful
Mm-hmm.
and relatable, right? I
Yeah.
think it's interesting because power is often a word that has negative connotations. Like, ring of power is this metaphor for how having power is inherently corrupting and destroying of the soul. But I actually think you got to have some power. You got to have the power to feel like you have some level of control over your life, not absolute control, but enough control that you can be sane and feel comfortable and feel like you can make choices. You can make choices, and those choices matter.
Yeah.
That is something that's missing for kids very often. I personally try to be conscious of this and let my kids make choices, because I remember like how powerless you feel when you're a kid. Because I mean, fundamentally, you don't get to make any major decisions,
Mm-hmm.
by default anyway.
Yeah, no, I think this is exactly what this is, and I think this ties into what you were talking about with the dam as a metaphor earlier in the show, right?
Yeah.
That the your obsession with Pennywise in the water, I think, is not unfounded, because the river, the canal, the sewers, the waters of Derry being these things that are innately connected with this monster, and thusly the dam is them, taking their city back in a way, influencing their power over this evil that emanates from the town, stopping it. Like, and that is in essence, as we move forward into the book, a precursor of what they're going to want to do later, right? To take the power from this monster back, to take their power as people, as kids, as adults soon enough, take that power back. And it's this perfect like capsule of everything that is, that like the thing that brings these people together for the first time is them exerting this little amount of power.
Mhm.
And they will go on to do that more.
Yeah. It's really cool. Love it.
So before long, Stanley and Richie both join in on the construction, allowing us to finally see the kid versions of these two we met a few weeks ago, and getting us closer and closer to our magic number of 7 that we know is going to be our group. We were still missing Mike and Bev, but we've got 5 of the 7 here.
Yeah, we've been building up toward that. I think it makes sense narratively and pacing wise that we're doing it this way so that we can kind of get to know these kid versions of the characters piecemeal.
Yeah, yeah. So Eddie spends a little bit of time here thinking about Richie, who he describes as constantly getting in trouble with his mouth, which we kind of do already. And we see here that Richie kind of kicks things off at this stage of the book with his N-word Jim voice. And man, Matt, I have such complex feelings about Richie. On the one hand, he's super annoying, and he's the super annoying kid that we've all probably been friends with at one point, who's like performing constantly even when it's not appropriate, who can't shut up, who can't stop telling a joke, who can't stop ragging on you. And it just gets on your nerves. On the other, I really love Richie. I do. There's something to respect about that constant performer kid as well.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more we're going to learn about him as we go, that endears you to him even more. But man, not really the best introduction to a character here, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree that we all knew the one super annoying kid who drove us crazy. But like the thing is, the reason why you tolerate the super annoying kid is because they have a kind of confidence that is fascinating. Because you
Yeah.
have to be confident to be that annoying. It's and the funny thing is, as you grow up, you realize that these annoying kids, they grow out of it, and they often grow into just being confident men who are likable. And because you don't grow out of the confidence, you just grow out of the like being horribly socially miscalibrated. At least ideally. I'm not saying everyone grows out of that. Some of them don't. But I think we are innately drawn to that confidence and that self assurance that a person or a character like that has.
Yeah, no, I think that's right for sure. I do think it's very interesting that like, to get 21st century a little bit here, like what was probably just seen as like mildly annoying of him doing like this very specific black voice has aged even more poorly. And I'm not like attacking the book for Richie being racist. I'm just saying that it does probably not help with the initial depiction of a character when it's that voice in particular.
Yeah, I don't remember. Obviously, I don't know, but I feel like that was probably kind of a cringe thing to have the character be doing, even in the '80s when the book came out. Um,
Yeah,
I don't really know though.
probably.
I do. I think
Definitely less so.
less so, but I definitely think he's trying to make Richie come off as unpleasantly over the top annoying, and
Yeah.
because it's more than just that, right? It's also like you said, he's constantly ragging on everyone. He's constantly like he's the guy who will like make a comment about Ben's weight, even though everybody else is just kind of being polite and not really doing
Yep.
that. And 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 just kind of that unceasingly, and it's like, oh my god, dude, shut up! Like
Yeah.
we're all just getting along here. Um, and I mean, I feel like something's being set up for like how this character is gonna evolve over the course of his childhood, because we see who he turns into. He turns into, basically a good guy who makes a living off of his his characters.
Hmm.
Um, so are we going to see some character development in his childhood arc? And
Yeah.
excited to see where we go with this character.
We will find out. I do like this little detail though, that at least at this age, Richie's voices all kind of suck,
Uh-huh.
that most of them sound the same. So I love this idea that, he wasn't like, we talked about Eddie's, if you want to call it a superpower, his sense of direction. Um, it's not like Richie has this like superpower of voices, at least from the beginning. He gets better
Yeah,
at it as he gets older.
that's true. Yeah, that is funny.
So we also meet Stan too, Matt. But especially around Richie, he appears to be the quiet friend, who just doesn't get a word in edgewise. So we mostly just like observe him. I think there's this little throwaway thing where Eddie sees him looking up and knows that Stan's a huge birder and he's probably looking for some birds. There's just not too much to say about him yet, so there's not too much we can say here. But it is just really fascinating because, again, thanks to the structure of the novel, we have set him aside and apart from the rest of the group, right? Because we know he's the only one that's not coming back to Derry. We're never going to get a Stan point of view chapter. He's gone. And so he is different. And so it's interesting the way the text is kind of treating him different here, where he's in the scene. He just doesn't really make his presence known in this scene.
Yeah. I mean, I barely even parsed that he existed in this chapter. So I agree that he hasn't really made his presence. I think part of that is due to pacing again, that
Mm-hmm.
you need to pace out your introduction to the kid versions of the characters. And King, while he is a master of very vividly introducing you to a new character in like a page or two, I do think that if you do those too close back to back, then it gets real weird and confusing.
Yeah.
So I think he's spacing it out on purpose.
Yeah, I could go ahead and say we're going to get more Stan, like for sure. Like you don't have to worry about that. But
Sure.
yeah, it will be different from the rest of the characters, right? Because we will not be in his head.
Yeah, yeah.
So I do love this moment as like it's getting near the end of the day. The dam is complete and everyone's just hanging out. And Eddie looks over at Bill and realizes he's about to say something important. Eddie knew that Bill rarely said anything important unless it was perfectly quiet, because it was so hard for him to speak. And suddenly he wished he had something to say, or that Richie would start in with one of his voices. He was suddenly sure Bill was going to open his mouth and say something terrible, something which would change everything. Eddie reached automatically for his aspirator, pulling it out of his back pocket, and held it in his hand. He did this without even thinking about it. And so I love this moment, right? This realization that everything's about to change, that not our inciting incident of the novel, but our inciting incident of this phase of the novel is about to happen here when Bill tells his story.
Yep. I actually empathized with Eddie not wanting him to talk, because you kind of wish these kids could just get on with their summer, have a nice childhood, have a nice summer, not do this thing that we know is going to happen.
Yeah.
Because we've been enjoying this kind of idyllic dam building interlude, and you're like, oh, I just want this to be able to keep going. I
Yeah.
like that King puts us in that position.
Yeah, it's great how he kind of knows how this ability for the brain to forget stuff, right? We just came off this chapter where this kid dies, right? Not too far from where they are right now, a kid gets attacked by a monster and killed. And yet we get to live in the kind of the peaceful serenity of 5 kids playing and making a dam for a few pages, and we've almost forgotten the horror that awaits them. And then Bill, being the leader, has to kind of bring it back to that. And you're right, we're with Eddie here. It helps that we're in his point of view, but no, let's keep having fun. Let's keep having a good time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Bill proceeds to tell the story of last night, Georgie's wink in the bloody photo album. Observant Eddie here notices something. None of the kids have any slight look of disbelief on their faces after he finishes the story. They all just believe him. But several of them, Stan and Ben at least, have a look of recognition, a recognition that Eddie shares, which prompts our text to move into Eddie's Pennywise story. You starting to notice a trend here, Matt, that there's an inciting Pennywise story for each one of these characters?
I mean, that is what I kind of thought we were going to do. But yeah, yeah, sure.
Well, now you know for sure.
Okay, great.
So Eddie's story takes place around the often mentioned house on Neibolt Street. We learn that one of Eddie's favorite activities when he's bored is to drive down to the end of the road, or bike ride down to the end of the road on Neibolt, and just watch the trains go by. That's what he likes to do. He likes to just watch the trains.
Yeah, I feel nostalgic for the 1950s when a kid could just be like, I'm bored, gonna go watch the trains.
I mean, you could do that now.
No, can't do that anymore.
You could totally do that.
I miss the 50s, man. I miss the 1950s.
You were negative 30.
It's just simpler time.
50s nostalgia is one of the dumbest things in the world to me.
You know, there is some okay, joking aside, like I think the book itself is trying to give us kind of a more honest look at like the 50s, right? Where yeah, the cool thing about that era of time in America is you could just ride your bike out into the woods and build a dam, or carve your name into a kid's stomach with a knife. Like there were pros and cons is what I'm saying. Like there were definite benefits to having that level of freedom, but I think there's also some serious drawbacks. Like that's literally why there's able to be a monster that hunts children, is that the children are totally unsupervised, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Do you think the reason people say it was a simpler time back then is just literally because they were younger and had less responsibilities?
Absolutely, yes. It's the same reason why I always want to go back and play EverQuest, even though I have actually gone back and tried to play EverQuest and it doesn't compel me the way it used to. It's because it was.
You don't want to go back and play EverQuest. You want to go back in time to where you had nothing to do all day except for play EverQuest,
right? And no responsibilities, and yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That sure would be nice.
Yeah. Except the funny thing is, we say that, and yet in truth, we were very often bored out of our minds and wished we could have been doing something better than EverQuest, but we didn't have the power, which is the idea here. Is like, well, you didn't have the power to be doing anything other than building a dam in the woods. So you build a dam in the
trains.
Woods. Yeah, stare at trains. That's all you can do. So you make do, and then 30 years later, or it's 80 years later, you remember it as being a beautiful time of simple pleasures.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. I do love this anecdote we hear from Eddie here, that one night, like, some random train guy just like threw a crate of lobsters off of the lobster car at Eddie. Like, we learn later that the company was about to go bankrupt, and I think the guy was just like, "Fuck it, here's some lobsters." He brings them back to his mom, and she cooks them up. And this is so hilarious to me because you think Eddie's mother, out of anyone, would be like really reticent to eat random train lobster. But no, she's like so like out of her mind about like the how classy of a dish it is, that she just has to immediately cook them and eat them up. She even like tries to force Eddie into having some, and he just won't do it. He's just creeped out by him and it doesn't end up eating anything. So like, I guess her caution about the dangers of the world end at lobster.
You know, there's got to be something that really happened, or at least the king heard about, that somebody threw some lobsters off a train. They were like, "Oh, hell yeah, lobsters!" Like, but they're just, you don't know where those came from. I don't know if that I would eat found lobster, because That's kind of, yeah.
I'm gonna go on the record and say I would not eat random train lobster.
There's very few situations where I would be like, yeah, I'll eat that lobster. Restaurants would be one.
What about gas station lobster?
Less so. Probably not. I'll even say.
Nah, you can't fuck with that shit, man. Nah, it's like sushi.
Yeah.
There's very specific places you eat sushi at, and no other places.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I guess the argument here is that the lobsters are alive, and so like you're going to cook them, which will probably cure them of any bacteria and shit they have, probably. But I still don't think I would just accept a random crate of lobster thrown at me from a train.
Uh-huh. What about oysters? What about a crate of oysters thrown at you from a train?
Even less.
Even less.
You know how easy it is to get bad oysters and just get horribly sick?
Yeah, I basically don't eat oysters anywhere except like the Gulf Coast. And even then, you're kind of taking your life into your hands.
They're so good though. I love them so
are.
much. But yeah, like the odds of you getting sick are pretty high.
I had a ton of oysters a few weeks ago. I'm
jealous.
A singular experience. Yeah.
So jealous. Come on, oyster train, let's go. They're building a train right by my house. It's for it's for public transit, not for seafood shipping. But I'm gonna stand by it until someone throws me some fucking seafood.
You should just get on the train with a literal wooden crate full of lobsters and see what happens.
Oh, this is a great experiment. Let's do it.
Yeah.
First, peanut butter and onion. Second, lobster train.
Yeah, just look really worried and have the lobsters be in your lap in the crate and see if that creates any interesting situations.
I feel like the police are going to be called.
I hope so.
All right. So we learn that the train tracks and the rather rundown state of houses along Neibolt Street have made it a haven for vagrants, and it is one such vagrant that once offered Eddie a blowjob for a quarter. The man had what Eddie thought at the time was leprosy, but was, according to his friends, probably just syphilis. But this is obviously something that's had a pretty huge effect on Eddie, right?
Yeah, right. So this is one thing I wanted to talk about because this is an obviously non-supernatural traumatic event that happened. There's a weird creep loitering around an abandoned house, made a really horribly inappropriate approach toward a kid, traumatizes the kid doesn't want to talk about it, and then so the form that Pennywise takes for Eddie later is not some monster from a movie from someone's imagination. It's just a much worse version of this actual traumatic thing that actually happened to him, and I think that's an interesting wrinkle on kind of what Pennywise is and what Pennywise can do.
Yeah, like I think that's a great point because up until this point we could have just gone he's the pop culture monster. But it is obviously more important than that. It's just that so many young kids, the things that they're scared of most happen to come from the movies they watched, especially at that time in life. But not all of it, obviously. You're totally right. And we see that Eddie's leper is distinctly different from that.
Right.
I did kind of enjoy the hilarious innocence of the boys discussing what sex is and how one would get an STD. You know, like it's so funny. I did think like it's like I felt like I knew what sex was by the time I was in 5th grade. I don't know if that's true for you, and I wonder if that's just like a times thing where kids are learning about this stuff earlier and earlier.
I mean, I think I probably still had some misconceptions.
Well,
by
certainly,
the time I was that, but like that's I think basically what's happening here, where it's like really, it is funny. Like it's very funny how he describes this. I forget the specific word choices, but there's always some great word choices and some mistaken assumptions about what goes where and so forth. But
I'm pretty sure I understood the basics enough to know that you don't put sperm in the girl's belly button by the time I was their age.
It makes so much sense though when you think about
Does it?
Because when you're a kid, you've got to wonder, like, what's this belly button for?
I mean,
And
I guess.
nobody knows. There's
I will give you that. I
no
guess.
answer. Yeah.
I feel like if you would ask your parents what your belly button's for, they would give you a relatively quick and easy to understand answer.
See, I feel like I didn't even really understand the nature of like what a placenta was until I was like 27. So
Do you need to understand what a placenta is to know what a belly button's for?
so there's subtleties to what a belly button is, I think, because it's like, what are you getting from your mom exactly? You're not getting her blood, right? I think I thought that you were getting your mom's blood until I was, again, very
No, you
old.
totally are.
No, you're getting your blood. The placenta is transferring nutrients and oxygen with your mom's blood via diffusion across the placenta. And some DNA and shit makes it through that barrier, which is why the mom
Yes.
has the kid's DNA and vice versa. But it's not like
Yes.
it's not like your mom's just shooting her blood through the baby's body. So,
Okay.
so it's somewhat more subtle than I thought when I was younger. Is my
Okay.
only point here.
I'm going to step back here for a minute and go,
Uh,
none of that is relevant to understanding what a belly button is.
I think. Look, if I have a point here, which I may not, it's that it's that ev- everyone always has misconceptions about sex and belly
Sure.
buttons. And so when you say, "Did you know what sex was when you were 10?" I'm like, I was somewhere along the spectrum of knowing what sex is, but
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I would say that we were probably further along that spectrum than these kids seem
I
to
I,
be.
I agree. I agree. Yes, agree with you.
Okay. That was the best tangent we've ever had in
It,
our entire show.
it was pretty good. I enjoyed that.
I'm just imagining a young Matt like refusing to accept the simple explanation of, "Oh, that's where the tube that connected you to your mom
Uh huh.
went." And be
And
like,
then
"Wait a minute.
wait a minute.
So the blood just comes gushing through?"
Yeah. There's so many things about this that don't make sense.
All right. So as we said, it's clear that this experience really, really creeped the hell out of Eddie, as of course it would. And yet the house, we're told, takes on a kind of glow in Eddie's imagination. And so one day he finds himself inexplicably back there. He describes it as being pushed. And this is, we've already kind of talked about it, but this is really another example of Ka, or, the idea of how much free will does a character have. Like, they seem to be pushed and corralled and moved towards certain things. But like we talked about, I think there's also this really believable thing where Eddie had this incredibly traumatic experience at this place and then becomes kind of weirdly fascinated by that place as this like, I love that King describes it as having this glow, and it's like, I really, man, that was scary. I really want to check that out again,
Yeah. Yeah, I like it too because the glow may or may not be supernatural, right? I like the idea
Mhm.
that it's not supernatural. It's just like when there's a place where you feel like there's something unresolved, it can have a kind of you could use the word glow and it would make sense.
Yeah, yeah. So, feeling pushed by the strange force, Eddie climbs under the porch of the house at 29 Neibolt Street. He sees evidence of a bunch of vagrants, but none themselves. And as he's looking through the window into the house, Eddie's asthma manages to kick up at the perfect time. He drew back, and that was when the face appeared. Its coming was so sudden, so startling, and yet at the same time so expected that Eddie could not have screamed even if he hadn't been having an asthma attack. His eyes bulged, his mouth creaked open, and it was not the hobo with the flayed nose. But there were resemblances, terrible resemblances, and yet this thing could not be human. Nothing could be so eaten up and remain alive. Um, what'd you think of the appearance of the leper, Matt? Was this a great horror scene for you?
Sure, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's very, very creepy description. Very vivid. I think King is really stretching his sort of descriptive writing, particularly for disgusting or scary things in
Mm-hmm.
this book. I did like it a lot. Yes.
So we see here, Matt, that the leper calls himself Bob Gray, and we didn't touch on this much when Pennywise first introduced himself to Georgie way back in chapter 1 because there was so much other stuff going on here. But let's take a beat to do this now because this is the second time that Pennywise has used a name that sounds pretty normal and mundane. Bob Gray? What does that mean?
Yeah. And this is, by the way, one of those things I don't really know anything about. I was a bit surprised at the idea that Pennywise would have a normal name that wasn't Pennywise. Was Pennywise once a man that was he's possessed or something? I don't know. It definitely, we're supposed to be asking these questions, right? Why else would you even bother to give him a name and then have it be consistent between appearances?
Yeah. And it's such a wonderfully picked and designed name, right? Like
Mhm.
Bob.
Yeah. Yeah.
Robert Gray. Like it's just so it's like the most mundane name
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah. It's the most
Gray.
generic.
His name
Yeah.
is Gray.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very generic and unremarkable in contrast to Pennywise, the dancing
Yeah.
clown,
Yeah.
which is intentionally very evocative and kind of attention getting.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So Eddie backs away. He bursts out from under the porch. He keeps running. He makes it to his bike, and he has time to calm himself down and imagine that everything was a dream before the leper comes bursting out from under the porch as well. Now it is dressed in a clown suit. Matt, did you know what color puffs it had on the front of this clown suit? Did you know?
Were they orange?
They were orange. Yes, you're correct. Pennywise tells Eddie it's no good to run, but this Eddie, unlike the previous one, manages to escape. So he gets away. Good for you, Eddie.
Great.
So his story finished, we return immediately to the aftermath of Bill's confession to the group. And basically the result of this is that he retells his story too. Ben reveals his story about the clown as well. And our characters now have noticed a pattern and they're going to be forced to deal with it in some way. I did like this part though, because Richie is not sure he's believing Ben's story or Eddie's story. And we get this little bit here. Pictures can't wink either, Ben said. Richie looked from Ben to Bill, troubled. Accusing Ben of dreaming awake was one thing. Accusing Bill was something else. Bill was their leader, the guy they all looked up to. No one said it so out loud. No one needed to. But Bill was the idea man, the guy who could think of something to do on a boring day, the guy who remembered games the others had forgotten. And in some odd way, they all sensed something comfortingly adult about Bill. Perhaps it was a sense of accountability, a feeling that Bill would take the responsibility if responsibility needed to be taken. The truth was, Richie believed Bill's story, crazy as it was, and perhaps he didn't want to believe Ben's, or Eddie's for that matter. I love that line, Matt, that perhaps a sense of accountability, a feeling that Bill would take the responsibility if responsibility needed to be taken. I love this.
Yeah. One interesting thing that occurs to me here is like I didn't really get this vibe off of adult Bill. Like adult Bill, like he's this writer, but he's not like a leader of men. He's not like a guy who has attracted like a following of like a solid crew of or really anything like that. I mean, he has his wife, but that's kind of it, right? At least as far as we know. I just thought it was interesting how this is one case where the kid qualities seem to have, I don't know, transformed into something else in the adult.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it could be something that he's lost along with the memories when he left Derry, right? This is a really good point. I don't know if I ever really considered this anymore, but you're totally like even his interaction with Audra doesn't seem like he's like the leader in that marriage either.
Right. Yeah, he almost seems weak in that scene. Like like he doesn't seem like this compelling sort of man who's just full of ideas. It's like his idea generation facility has been subsumed into his role as a fiction writer, and it's almost like this whole part of his personality has shrunk into just like, well, he writes stories where he is this guy, but in his life he's not really this guy anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, that it is very much I think this is one of those weird instances where telling and not showing actually works, because I do think you're right that we're almost being told again and again and again here that Bill's the leader, and we haven't seen it too much yet. I mean, there's little bits and pieces of it, like with his decision to tell them all about um the event with Pennywise, and the kind of the way they defer to him naturally. But like I think it is true that we haven't seen the why of that very much. Like they keep calling him the idea man, right? The guy who could think of something to do. And we're told that Bill's the one that came up with the, hey, let's build a dam. But we didn't get to witness that scene, really. So we're going off a lot
Yeah,
of other people's
sure.
stories right now, and we haven't seen the Bill that they're describing quite yet.
I guess the only exception that comes to my mind is that he is the one who runs to get the inhaler,
That's true. That's
which is
true.
kind of a heroic moment of proactive
Yeah.
problem solving. But that's other than that, yeah, I can't think of any
No, that
examples.
is taking responsibility if responsibility needed to be taken. I think you're right
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the good point.
Overall, I think we're on the same page though. Yeah.
Yeah. So Richie reiterates that he's seen nothing like the others are describing, and I think we kind of believe him, right? Like it doesn't seem like there would be a reason to not believe Richie in that moment.
Right. I mean, I think he just doesn't want to. I think it
Sure.
literally is just like wishful thinking, which uh, any kid, you can hardly blame them for wishful thinking. But I think that's the special thing about these kids is
Hmm.
um, they're better than that.
But also, Stan at first says he's seen nothing like the others are describing either. But it's
Mhm.
clear that, and this is kind of why I believe Richie when he says he hasn't seen anything, because Stan also says he hasn't seen anything, and it's very clear that he's just lying, right? And we move into the chapter ends with us kind of getting prepared to hear from Stan what his story is. I think the only bit of it we get to see is it wasn't a clown, and then we are rudely interrupted by a very angry Officer Nell, who has come to see why the entirety of Derry is flooding from some kids making a dam.
It happens. Yeah. What a terrible time to have to stop reading though, because I really wanted to hear this next bit because I don't really have any idea what to expect.
Well, as soon as we're done here, Matt, you can go read this next bit, because that's what we will be doing next week. Next week, we will be doing just chapter 8. It's a long chapter, so we will be covering just chapter 8 in next week's reading. It's titled Georgie's Room and the House on Neibolt Street. So I think you can already start to maybe imagine what kinds of things are going to be happening.
I sure can.
I will remind you that like one of the things the characters talked about um, early on in the adult sections is the event that happened at Neibolt Street. That wasn't the one that Eddie was talking about with the leper, but one where they were all there. And I think specifically, it says that Bill saved Richie's life on that day.
Okay.
So just reminding you of these things as we prepare to move into that section.
I'm excited.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for our main section this week. Matt, we have to talk about discussion questions a bit here, but wow, we're not going to do it the way we normally do because, why, Matt? What was the discussion question from last week?
So the discussion question was for you to tell us what is your favorite Stephen King novel in the form of a haiku or a benku, which was intentionally left relatively vague. And we told people to answer us on Twitter primarily. People answered all kinds of places. And the fact is, I don't think it would be great if we just sat here and read like 50 benkus.
Yeah.
Um, and also like if we read each of them and then responded to it and tried to analyze it, that would take like 4 hours. So we're just not going to try that. We suggest we suggest you go check out the hashtag benku on Twitter if you want to see everybody's benkus. Very fun ones out there. I read all of them and I just find it so delightful. Really enjoy everyone's creativity. And uh, yeah, I'm always tickled by the variety of answers because you'd think that there would be one Stephen King novel that was just like, oh, everyone agrees that's the best one. But no,
Mhm.
people have such a huge variety of favorites. I just love that. Like,
Yeah.
I just love that fact.
This was such a fun experience for me too. I read them all as well. Some really, really great ones out there. I think the ones that are fun are the ones that, like, a lot of people chose to say it's this book and I'm going to write a haiku for it. But most people, it seems, just like wrote the haiku, and like you gotta use your brain to figure out
Yeah,
which books we're talking about here.
yeah. I sent you mine, and you were like, "Man, I don't have any fucking idea what what."
Hold on.
Uh-huh.
You can't.
Go
You
on.
didn't just send me yours.
Uh-huh.
We were in the middle of a different conversation,
Uh-huh.
and you just dropped this thing without any context.
Yeah, without quotes around it or anything.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
I just started saying nonsense to you, basically.
And then you're like, "Oh, you didn't get what I was
You
going
didn't
for
get what I
there?"
was going
No,
for?
of course not.
Fucking Smabenku. And you're like, what is happening? And that's the story, is that
Uh-huh.
I'm very frustrating to talk to. Usually I would say
Mhm.
that's the case. Anyway, so yeah, the hashtag BenQ on Twitter. Let's check it out.
It's great. And this is honestly, like, I was a little worried about this question because, like, I didn't know how many people would be like willing to play along with it. I figured there'd be a few, but like, this one of those things like, oh, we have to create something. I'm scared. But no, everyone had so much fun with it. It's such a pleasure. Please, please, I'm begging you guys, if you didn't participate and haven't checked out other people's yet, please do that. Yeah, go to the subreddit or just go to hashtag BenQ on Twitter. It's so good, man. There's so
Yeah.
many good ones. I tried to retweet every single one I saw, so hopefully I didn't miss any of them.
Yeah. There's also a bunch over on Reddit, like you just said, which I can't retweet those, but I did like them. So
I did
great.
click that up arrow.
That's right.
So thank you all for doing that so much.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, you want to move on to next week's question?
Next week's question is there's the joke question. Which I'm going to read the joke question anyway because I think it's funny. What meal would you eat that was thrown at you by a random person from a train? You can answer that if you want. That's not the real question. The real question is brought to you by Phillip H on email. This was Philip's idea, actually. And the question is, who's your favorite natural leader in fiction?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of great examples of this and a lot of different kinds, a lot of different ways of being a leader,
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to the answers to this one.
I'm curious, Matt, were you like, I was always the kid for whatever reason that like, I always liked the leader of the group in fiction. Like, we have a group of characters. Like the perfect example of this is Leonardo, where I always wanted to be Leonardo, despite the fact that he's objectively the lamest of the turtles. But I would always want to be him. Like Power Rangers, it was the Red Ranger, always the Red Ranger, because he's like the leader of the Rangers.
Sure.
I don't know why I always want to, because I wouldn't describe myself necessarily as like the leader type, the one that's gonna like step up and be the leader of a group I'm in. That's not really me. But like I was always really interested in that character in the stories I read.
Yeah. I guess it depends. I don't know that I specifically had the same attraction for like Leonardo above the other turtles. I mean, I do think this is an interesting specific thing about you. I think I was probably more interested in like I don't know. I like the White Ranger, but that's because he was weird.
And he eventually became the leader.
And he did eventually become the leader. But like, I think my point, what I'm trying to say there is, I didn't like. It wasn't that he became the leader that was why I liked him. It was he actually had like a villain arc, if I recall correctly. That was a long time ago.
And that was just never me. I was never like the villain arc guy. Like in some ways, liking the protagonist of a kid show is like the most boring thing you can do, because they're like usually the least interesting character. Because they're like the main one, and so they can't change very much.
Yeah.
and there's so much more interesting dynamic stuff that goes on with the characters around them. And yet here I am liking them. And that's like, honestly, the first time I read this book, Bill was my favorite character. Bill, because he's the leader.
Sure, that's interesting. I think I think that's maybe one of the reasons why you want to have a variety of characters in your work, is because different characters will appeal to different people. It doesn't matter like how well you write them. It's just like, no, it's just different people's dispositions are lined up in a way where they're just going to like different types of characters naturally. So
fascinating.
Cool.
Maybe it's because I want to be that type of person and know I'm not, so I like reading about him. I don't know.
Yeah, and I want to have a villain arc. I want the black Spider-Man suit. I want to do the corny dancing on the street.
Matt, you can do that today. Go, you can do it right now. Go.
Great. Thank you for permission. I'll do that.
All right, so we will dive into that a little bit more next week as we examine the natural leaders that everyone comes up with for their discussion question answers. Can't wait to see those. But that is going to do it for us this week. As we said, we will read just one chapter next week, Chapter 8, Georgie's Room and the House on Neibolt Street. It's going to be a really fun one, Matt. We're really moving into it now. We're 300 and something pages into this story. Let's go.
Awesome. Cool. Remember, you can reach us at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, or over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia, where once again, that would be the best place to answer this week's discussion question.
And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you never miss a single solitary second. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else that podcasts exist.
That's right. And if you like Kingslingers and you want to support us in what we're doing here, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. We've got a bunch of cool bonus podcasts over there, including Other Levels of the Tower, where we discuss adaptations of Stephen King's works, such as the recent Children of the Corn adaptation. We had a lot of fun talking about that one.
One of the worst films I've seen in a long time.
I agree.
And of course, if you cannot afford to help us out right now financially, that's okay. You can help us out in a bunch of other ways. One of the biggest ways you can do that is by leaving us rating and reviews on Apple Podcasts and other platforms. This week's Spotlight review comes from an old bag of bones who gives us 5 stars and says, "Spellbound. I just found this podcast and I'm completely hooked. Fascinating insights and honest speculation. In less than 2 weeks, I've listened to the breakdown of 2 different books, Eyes of the Dragon and The Stand. The analysis and conversations are intriguing. I'm genuinely delighted I found this. I'm starting The Long Walk next, another all-time favorite. Thank you for being here and for putting your unique perspective on these books. A constant reader and recent discoverer. Perfection." Wow. Perfection. Matt, you're perfection.
Wow, that is intense. I love it. Thank you. Feels good.
I gotta say, old bag of bones. When I was reading this, I was like, I've listened to the breakdown on 2 different books. In my head, I went, oh, probably 2 of the shorter ones, and then one of them was The Stand. And I was like, that's impressive. That's a lot of hours and a lot of episodes that we spent on The Stand.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that very, very kind words. Matt probably doesn't even know that Bag of Bones is a King novel. You probably don't even know that, Matt.
I don't know anything. I'm just a fucking idiot.
So angry. Wait, did you know that Bag of Bones was a King novel?
I mean, now that you say that, I did, but I didn't actually get the reference until you pointed it out just now.
Okay. So, well, maybe you shouldn't be so damn defensive.
I'm not defensive. What are we talking about?
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back next week with more Pennywise is connected to water theories. We'll see you then. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.
imagining you with like the red yarn.
Yeah.
Like, there's water under the whole city.
But
It's
in
everywhere.
this case, is there water underneath the steelworks? There has to be water.
They needed to cool the steel somehow.
They have to cool the steel. That's where the explosion came from, is the steam. The steam.
Oh my God. It's great.